This week on My Northern Roots, I caught up with fellow community champion Faiza, who I spoke to back in episode 1. Like me, Faiza has been intrigued by the subject of personal and ancestral heritage, her own roots being somewhat different to mine. We discuss our Northern Roots community champion roles, how it has inspired us, and how a little empathy can go a long way. But first, I'm recording this podcast kind of in real time, I guess, over the period of the Northern Roots Community Champion position, which started in November 2023 and is finishing in May 2024. It's May 2024 now, and this is a kind of unscripted, unexpected interval in the podcast, really. Fortunately, my Uncle Jack passed away yesterday on the 16th of May. My Uncle Jack is, or was, the husband of my Aunt Marlene, who is my dad's sister, elder sister, and Jack and Marlene have been together since 1959. In fact, they got a message off the Queen a couple of years ago for their, I think, is it golden wedding anniversary, diamond wedding anniversary, platinum wedding, I don't know. They've been married a really long time and they got a message from the Queen anyway. And he's passed away, and obviously, the family's very upset about this, and he'd been sick for a while. He was in his 80s, and he passed away peacefully at home with his family around him. And, when you're recording a podcast about your roots and where you live and all that, and last week's episode was about my parents, and my dad was telling us about how he grew up. And, my dad was 7 when Marlene and Jack got together, so Jack was very much a big brother to my dad, and he's just always been there. And it just makes you think. It's quite poignant when things like this happen, when you start to think about things as they were, as they are, and as they will be. Marlene and Jack have just always been Marlene and Jack, and now it's just Marlene, and they've always been part of my life. And when I think back to my Uncle Jack in earliest memories, him and Marlene used to sit in their own chairs in the living room, and Jack used to smoke a pipe, and he'd smoke his condo tobacco. I don't know if you're familiar with pipe smoke. It's not something that you see very often these days, but it's very heavy, very wispy smoke. It's not like cigarette smoke or vapes or anything like that. It just kind of hangs in the air in this kind of silvery blue light that would just sort of like a cloud, and it used to smell amazing. Of all the kind of smoke, it's not good for us, but it had the best smell, and it's just something that you associated with him, packing his pipe up and lighting it up and watching with fascination as a kid, I guess. The snooker would be on, or the racing would be on. You talk about the football, and as a couple, just such a warm, compassionate, caring couple that would always give us the time of day whenever we called in. Even me, myself and my brother, or just myself, would just pop in. They just live on the next street, and you just call in and sit down and have a cup of tea and slice of pie or whatever. I just wanted to mark Jack's passing really on this podcast, because it's come, like I said, at a very kind of poignant time when I'm reflecting on what it means to be who I am and where we are. And 1959, when Jack and Marlene started to go out together, and then they got their house on Wellington Ave in Coppice, Worneth. Things have changed a lot, and we talk a lot about how things had changed, and they moved into what was an empty house, no heating, virtually nothing in it, and they've been there ever since. Yeah, and it's the end of an era, and it just makes you think. I've got cousins. Jack had great-grandchildren. Yeah, a funeral. We've not had a family funeral for quite a long time, and they obviously are always very emotional, and they bring everybody together, and it's an emotional moment. And I just wanted to acknowledge Jack and say that he was a great uncle and great guy, and we'll all miss him. back on episode 1, you and I spoke about that connection to Oldham. You told me about how you moved here when you were younger and all that.
Yeah.
And you were really interested in looking back into that heritage, your own heritage story, your own Northern Roots story. And can you just tell us a bit about what you've been up to since because we spoke, it was like back in December or something like that about it.
It was a while back, wasn't it?
Yeah. So what have you been up to in that journey, in that exploration?
Well, since then, I think that was really early days, wasn't it, with the project, in the sense of we're kind of finding our feet in where we wanted to explore. So since then, I've developed it a little bit more, given it a bit more thought, had a few meetings with a few people as well, and been supported a lot by Rebecca as well, because I know initially it was going to be part of the festival, then it was kind of taken out because there's been a lot of movement, hasn't there, with the festival. So I kind of took a few steps back, to be honest, but she really encouraged me to carry on with it, and to maybe have a look at it as a side project, just develop it, plant the seed kind of thing. So we've had, recently, it was last week actually, I reached out to a group in Oldham, and she supports South Asian women who are over 60. It's a fairly new group, and they do all kinds of sort of different activities. So we went there, me and Kimo went there. So I was supported there by Kimo, and she sort of did an initial introduction to the Northern Roots project. And I followed through with the Beautiful Oldham and then my Heritage project. And it's really nice because the venue was so lovely. It was an old church. I say old, it's actually in really good condition. I'm not sure if you're familiar with St. Thomas's. It's in Coppice, and I've driven past there quite a few times, but I've never actually been inside. And it's really beautiful. They've got like stained glass windows and a lovely space. So we walked in and they were having like an exercise yoga session. So all these lovely ladies sort of sat around in a circle, just doing their stretches and sort of having a giggle. And then they had a little massage corner at the side where they're sort of giving neck and shoulder massages. So I just thought it was a really nice atmosphere. And I do know the lady who runs the group. I've worked with her previously on a few projects. So it was really interesting when we first went in there. After the initial introduction, when I explained my heritage project, what I was looking to develop and sort of look into, there was a really good response from the women. Really keen to get involved, really keen to tell their stories. And they were actually prepped about what the consultation was going to be about. So it's not like they had any pre-prepared sort of idea on any stories, but it's like the memories were so vivid of that time. And I just kind of opened it up to them about the time when you sort of first came to the UK, what your feelings were and what the atmosphere was and anything else. I kind of left it very kind of open-ended. And yeah, we got some really fantastic responses from the women, keen to share their experiences, some similarities with the stories, some differences. But like I said, it's kind of very early days at the minute, so it's just like a taster session, if anything. But good signs. Hopefully another follow-on session soon with them.
So this whole thing from the community champion role that you've had, and we're looking at something now, you're looking at something which is going to reach beyond the allotted time. You know, we're nearly at the end of this program now. It finishes at the end of May, and so this is through this project and through the support from Rebecca and Kimo. Is this something now that you're planning to continue and do more work on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I mean, where it actually goes, I'm not sure, but definitely, it's kind of. We've got the ball rolling kind of thing. I mean, this idea is not something that's come just from the Northern Roots project. It's definitely something I sort of played with initially. I've had ideas about this kind of similar kind of theme around heritage and around storytelling. But the project has definitely given me the impetus to sort of move forward with it 100%. I think I might have stepped back like I have done in the past and just sort of left it. Not sure where to go with it. But I think with Rebecca in particular, I think she's given it a lot more direction. And like I said, she's experienced in this whole kind of area, so her support's been really fantastic. But yeah, it was just a case of making that initial connection and how to. I think with this project, we've kind of learned that because it's a very creative project, isn't it? And if you've not worked on creative projects before, it can be a bit novel. I think it was a bit for quite a few of us. But what it's made clear to me is that it's not always the ideas you have at the beginning of a project are not necessarily how the end project is going to look like. I mean, isn't that the case of the Beautiful Oldham? We've started off with so many ideas and they've moved and they've grown, some have dropped off, some have sort of changed shape, but we kind of still got to that end end part, haven't we? We've kind of developed it, but it's been quite a process in between. So that's what I've learned with this. I think I had a slightly more rigid idea about what I wanted to do, and I think now I'm opening up to just sort of maybe seeing where it leads.
Yeah, I think that's very similar to my story, really, insofar as this project that I'm working on now with the podcast and everything. It was already formed in a way in my head in this kind of journey of looking back a little bit, and it's not a massive deep dive into like my family ancestry and my roots or anything like that. It's a bit broader, but without this project giving me the time to and the focus, whenever, I don't know when it would have happened. I like to think it would have happened at some point, but I don't know when it would have been. And I'm so happy that it's given me the opportunity to do it now, and I'm really happy that the future looks like there is an opportunity directly, potentially, and hopefully through Northern Roots, but certainly through our own individual desire to want to carry on the work that we've started. We're coming to the end of the Northern Roots project or the Community Beautiful Oldham Why Not project, but we're all, or certainly some of us are just starting something, aren't we? And that's really, really, I don't know what I expected at the beginning, but I'm really happy that is an outcome now, that some of us are really, really passionate about carrying on our involvement or our own personal projects as well.
Me too. I think, like you said, it was one of those, when we first started, it was a bit vague. I wouldn't say we were winging it, but we were definitely kind of finding our feet with it, weren't we, in what direction to take it. And that's something I'm not too familiar with, working with such a sort of open-ended kind of loose project, but the way that it's kind of come together it's been like a learning curve, hasn't it? I think for everyone to actually see it actually work and to manifest itself into something solid and tangible, and you can sort of see where it's all come from. So from that point of view, I think I've learned a lot with regards to creative project management, ways to do it. I mean, this is a bit unique, this project, in that it's a co-create, isn't it? So it's a co-production. It's a community-based project, and that's also, I think, something that's kind of quite up and coming as well, and very kind of popular, if you like. But to have this experience firsthand from it, I think has been very valuable.
Definitely, and they're giving us that kind of like they put a value on our time and by paying us for our involvement and everything else. And I think there is real value in people from all different backgrounds coming together to work, and that's been a really, and I say that in terms of professional backgrounds and experience and everything else. We've got a real mixed bag of people, and everybody offers something different. So in terms of like this, the heritage project that you're working on slowly, it's all sort of coming together as you work through it. What has the perception of the value of what you're trying to do, has that changed? Has it grown? Do you feel more? Do you feel like now that it's more important than you did before? If you know what I mean, they're telling these stories and getting to know these people and these stories and sharing them. Do you feel like you've got more? It's got more impetus and more importance now?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think at the beginning it was more like a pet project of mine, and it was kind of more something that I had a very clear idea about, but I just wasn't ready to sort of move forward with it. But since working on this project and just talking about, like I said, there is a mixed bag of people, and it's with age range, it's with ethnicity, it's with experience and all kinds of things. And I think that's another benefit of the group, is that you're not just sat in like an echo chamber where sort of like-minded people are just sort of throwing the same kind of things. You are open to other people's perception and different points of view. And it's definitely sort of emphasised to me the importance of heritage projects generally. Because it's not just what I'd like to do is not just get the women to tell their stories, but it's not just for them, even though it will obviously be beneficial for them as well, but for future generations as well. Because a couple of generations down, no one will really have access to the stories and the reality of that generation that came over in the 60s and the 70s, and what their reality was, and what Britain looked like at the time, and what their day-to-day kind of trials and tribulations and happinesses and successes and joys were. So I think it's really important to have that story just for future generations, just for the sake of posterity, really, because their stories weren't really told. I mean, we went to the library, didn't we, the other day with the Beautiful Oldham project, and there's a couple of books on Oldham and on the South Asian community within Oldham over the years, and they were interesting, but it's like a handful of prominent figures who get access to that kind of, that stage to tell their story. So for me, it's more about the people who never got access to that stage, who were not necessarily prominent, whose stories were never asked, but who have those stories and, that invaluable kind of insight into what Oldham was like back in the 70s or even the 60s. So yeah, it definitely has emphasised just how important it is, and not just for the sake of a project, but for wider community benefit, I think.
I mean, if you think about where we are now in terms of technology and capturing information, we in the future people will be looking back and they'll know what we had for our tea, and they'll know where we went on holiday, and they'll know all kinds of useless information, all things that seem useless now. But maybe in the future they'll actually be interesting. But you go back to possibly. But some of it will. I'm sure there'll be a lot to filter through. But you go back to the 60s and 70s, you might have some photographs, like you said, some prominent people might have been interviewed for television or radio, something like that. There might be some articles written here and there, but sort of the information of normal people just wasn't captured, was it? In the same way that it can be now. And just the nature of life and everybody's getting older. If it's not captured in another way for posterity now, it won't be, will it? It'll be gone, like you said.
That's just it. I mean, I sort of said that to the group as well, and I said, obviously, I didn't want to put a down on it, but I mean, that generation is going. My mother passed away now. It's been, I think, 11 years, and everyone has a parent or both parents who has possibly passed away, or who is ill, or who they're caring for. And there were actually, interestingly, some ladies in that session who wanted to tell their parents' stories because their parents were no longer around. But they did really want that story to come out. And I mean, it's only really the generation after that who has direct access to that, So that was interesting as well. As one lady who said, I've got lots of things at home and photographs and that, but obviously I can't write it all down now because we had a bit of an activity session at the end. And I said, absolutely, that's fine. We'll catch up. But, I think that's another thing. I think sometimes if you've lost a parent, you feel the need to tell their version of events and their story, just for their sake more than anything else. And because you have access to that story and to their lives. So I agree with what you just said about the importance of it.
I think as well, like you sometimes people need like Faiza coming along to a group and saying, I want to help record your story, and give them the impetus to do it, because otherwise, we probably all sit around and say, I have to go through the old photo album and I have to do this and I have to do that. And then just these things just get put to one side and you forget and push back. And then, it's never too late until it's too late. And then, it doesn't happen. And so giving people a nudge and this kind of like making it a bit more formal, having a project and, you pushing people to making it timely and saying, okay, let's do this now, and giving them support and doing it is really important, because otherwise a lot of it won't happen.
It won't happen. Yeah, because I mean that's the feeling I got when all the faces kind of lit up when I sort of explained it and we were talking about things, and there was so much enthusiasm in the room, and some really vocal ladies, and even the ladies who traditionally may have been a bit quiet, they had their stories to tell. So it shows there is an eagerness to share, and they have stories to tell, and they want to. So that's there. And like you said, I think if I say that this project was a bit of a push for me, then obviously I think if you're older and you kind of think, well, my time is gone, there's less of an incentive to sort of go and dig it all up. And also there's an element of sensitivity as well, because not everybody has stories they want to recount, or some might be deaths or tragedies of the family that might not be able to or willing to kind of share. So it's a very delicate area to go into. But I think what we did was just open up that space and just say the space is here if you want to. If you feel that you're able to come forward and you want to sort of, engage with us, the space is there. And people don't have that platform, and they never have had really that platform to speak.
This is the thing with telling stories and sharing information. You have to be comfortable doing it. And so sometimes it takes a bit of time. Sometimes it requires anonymity. It's not necessarily like, you might get to a point with some people where they're prepared to share something with you, some stories with you, which are deeply personal, that you're able to share anonymously, as and that kind of thing, because obviously the deeper the impact of the story, the more profound it is, but it's the more difficult it is to get to get that someone to share that story in an appropriate setting. So then when you become onto the sort of like the creativity of how you present the information that you gather, whether it's through things like podcasts, through videos, written word, a combination of everything, art projects, there's loads and loads of really interesting avenues that you can go down in terms of how you present and tell those stories in the future. But you can't do any of it until you've actually curated all the stories and got people together and recorded it in one way or another. So I think it's a really, really important project, and I think it's something that I've been more than happy to, like we've already discussed briefly, and help you out going forward in it, because this I think is more vital now than ever, really, in terms of creating a community in Oldham which is empathetic and understanding and is able to sort of like see where each other's coming from and understand each other's stories.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people I think who want to try and help to deliver that, and I'm hoping that that's something we can do to. I think we mentioned like healing before. It's very healing to understand each other and give each other a bit of time.
Yeah, it is, and like you said, it opens access to other people's history. So not everybody knows the reasons why. A few generations down might not know the reasons why. The stories tend to pass down from generation to generation, to how we came and why we came. And, there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of divisive kind of politics and that flying around nowadays, isn't there? And in a way, it could maybe work to ease that or to calm it. Everybody has a bit more perspective on the reality, on history, on policies, on how things happen. It can hopefully work also in a way to diffuse that, and you have more empathy towards someone's story if you understand how someone came and the struggles they went through, and vice versa. And it I think encourages integration as well within the community, just spaces where you can speak and understand and communicate, and that's only a good thing, isn't it? Trying
to understand the similarities and why humans do what they do. I mean, I always think it's really funny because, the Brits abroad, they go to Spain, they go to wherever, they congregate together and they ghettoize parts of these places where, they serve English food and all the rest of it. And one of the criticisms that a lot of people in the UK will have is, well, people come over here and then they form their own little communities and, they do this and that. And it's like, well, there's a reason for it. The same reasons that when, some people go abroad, the Irish go abroad or the Italians go abroad or the English go abroad, wherever they go, that's because people need to be able to communicate with each other. They don't speak the language. It's just easier and it just makes a lot more sense. And to those people, it's something that pretty much everyone will do. It's a completely natural thing, isn't it? It is a natural thing, yeah. And we all do it, I think, is what I'm saying. Like, the English do it all the time when they go abroad. And it's actually really interesting because there's things like what's going on in the Canary Islands and stuff at the minute where they're saying, look, you know what, we're sick of this. You coming over. And it's kind of like, it kind of mirrors like the attitudes of some of the people over here. Yeah, ironically, it is ironic, especially if some of those people that are those ones that are critical of, people, migrants to this country coming and living in and forming their own communities. So it's just being honest and saying, look, this is nothing unusual. People do this. And then also the story of what's next, I think, is also really, really interesting, isn't it? I think, what looking back and saying, okay, this is why people came here. This is how people adapted and coped as well with such a massive change, to their lives, leaving family, leaving their home, etc., and then starting new families, having kids that are born here, grandkids that are born here, how society then changes and becomes different in the future. I just think it's endlessly fascinating to watch it, but you have to get involved in the conversation. You have to get involved in your community and get to know what's going on and understand people if you're going to, live peacefully and happily with the people around you. Because people are people. There's no big difference between anybody, really. Exactly, I don't think. Yeah, we're all kind of in the same boat, aren't we? We're living in the same town. We're kind of got the same struggles, but unfortunately, like you said, there is divisive elements within society that would like to sort of, elevate certain differences that don't really make a huge amount of difference. I would say about the point that you made on future generations. Ironically, there was something
I studied this in my final year at uni. I did a dissertation on it, and it was something called the myth of return. And it was an actual thing. It's a myth of return, because when the first generations came from India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, and in the Caribbean, there was a myth that they were going to come for a small amount of time and then go back. Because this is post Second World War, and then obviously post partition, and there was an understanding that obviously we'd be able to go for a bit. Maybe there's some job opportunities there, and we can make some money and come back. And there was this genuine thinking that we were just going to. It was, first of all, it was just the men. The women came afterwards, and there wasn't this plan of staying long term and growing roots and having children, and sort of, it wasn't meant to be that way. So this myth of return turned out to be just that. It was a myth, because it never happened for the majority of people. There were a few people who did end up doing that. I know families who, when the children were still quite young and in primary school, just said, right, we're gonna go back, because if it's not now, it's not going to happen. Because they'd seen that other families' children had grown older, they'd gone to secondary school, and it's harder when you let's say you're doing your GCSEs or your A levels. There's more of a sacrifice on part of the children, and so they're not as willing. So there were a few families who packed up and went back as per the plan, but obviously the vast majority couldn't do that, and life happens, and children happen, and then they go to school, and then they have their plans, and then they have their own ideas for their future. So it's not always a possibility. But yeah, that is something that is interesting. I think it's endlessly fascinating, like you just said as well, and so much potential and so many different ways that the story can be told as well. But like I said, early days at the minute, just carry on chipping away at it.
Have you spoke to anyone in your own family about it any more than since you started this?
I spoke to my dad. I told you about that, didn't I? So I did speak to my dad.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I think if I went back to speak to him again, I mean, he's not actually in the UK at the minute, but if he was to pop over again, I'd probably sit with him and maybe angle it a bit differently and be a bit more specific in the questions I asked him, so he could elaborate on different areas, because he kind of did a bit of a run through, to be honest. And I'm thinking there's areas that we could have sort of delved into a bit more. My auntie is someone who I've reached out to, but I've not managed to speak to her just yet. But she's aware that I will be popping over at some point. And it was interesting because the women, another common thing in the group was the home working element that a lot of the women did. Because they had children at home, and a lot of them couldn't speak English, they weren't comfortable going out to work, and there was a very much a feeling of who's going to employ us. They work from home, and so I don't know if it's a company or those employers who had industrial size machines, sewing machines, and they delivered these to the women who were willing to engage in work with them. And then they'd give them sort of big bin bags full of clothes, and they would get pennies, I think, if I remember correctly, for each garment. But and one of the women in the group said, I did it for like 20 years, which is like a long time. I know my auntie did it for a few years. My mother did it for a few years as well, but then they stopped. But obviously there's clearly people who carried on. And it must have been quite a successful industry if it went for that long. But yeah, that's actually something I'd like to speak to her about in a bit more detail as well, is that's an experience specific to the women. As opposed to the men. The men were obviously going out to work, whether it's in the mills or later on in their own businesses. But for the women who were at home, the theme I got running through was there was a lot of isolation back then, a lot of isolation. And obviously working from home kind of adds to the isolation. But yeah, that's another theme that I'd like to look into.
Just before we wrap up, I noticed something in the news this week. I think the guy might have been Ghanaian or something like that. I could be wrong, but African guy who's been living in the UK for 42 years has been told that he's, not British and not secure to be here, sort of thing. I haven't read up too much about it, but I've seen the headlines, and it just it gets me thinking about it because of what I'm talking about on the podcast and northern roots and identity and what it takes to feel. I feel northern. I'm English. I've got a bit of Italian ancestry, but I don't really feel Italian because I've only been there twice and that kind of thing. I can't claim sort of that it shaped me or formed me in any way. But a guy who's lived in the country for 42 years, he's probably going to feel very much formed by this country and a deep affinity to it, I should imagine. And I'm just like thinking about at what point, this sense of identity, at what point do you, and this is a really difficult, it's not a question you can necessarily answer, but it's more of a rhetorical question, but at what point do you start to feel products of where you are and where you live and where your family were born and your heritage. You know, like you've got a lot of Americans who are like, we're Irish or whatever, but it's hundreds of years since they were. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? There's like this thing of identity. Yeah. Does it even matter? Is it a thing? Does it, you know, is it relevant? Is it irrelevant? You know, what do you think?
I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I think it's probably different for everybody, isn't it? It probably depends on your circumstances and your story again. I mean, there is an assumption that everyone's story is the same, but obviously there's so many discrepancies in everyone's stories. But I mean, that story, I've seen that as well, and it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately, Matt, I've got to say. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me.
I'm really interested at the moment, and this project has really got me interested. I'm not really interested in the notion of nationalities and global this. I think local, focusing on what's happening locally is really important. The people around you, the people that are around you, they're here. So, like, you know, it's like it's like living in the moment. It's like whatever's present, whatever's. You know, that's what we need to deal with. Let's focus on our own. You know, there's obviously a lot going on in politics and things like that, and a lot of gaslighting and a lot of distraction and stuff. But let's just focus on what's immediately in front of you. You know, that's what's important.
That's all you can actually really affect, isn't it? That's exactly. The only kind of thing you've actually got any control over. Not to say that you shouldn't have an interest in anything you want, obviously, or wider political issues or social issues. But like you said, you don't really have as much power or control. Everything kind of starts local, isn't it? Generally, anyway, most movements have started locally and they've started small, haven't they?
It's like dropping a stone in a pond, isn't it? It all starts at the point of impact and then spreads outwards. And I think that if we want to try and change the country and make it a more tolerant and understanding and just more peaceful, less angry place, then it's about getting to know the people around you first and foremost, and respecting that everybody's here has a valid reason for being here.
Absolutely.
And is here not even necessarily because out of choice. You know, no one chooses where they're born, do they? You're just born there, aren't you? And sometimes you move to a place through circumstances at home being, you know, so terrible. You know, like you wouldn't, you know, if people could get out of Gaza now and come over here, you wouldn't blame them, would you? You'd say, come on, like, you know, help them over, because of where they are is, you know, currently is just, you know, hell on earth. So, like, you know, it's compassion first really does help, doesn't it? Rather than, so I mean, it's just we're in a fascinating moment in history, a fascinating time in history, quite a worrying one in many ways as well. But I think just to sort of wrap it up, I think we're on the same page in terms of understanding who we are by understanding where we are, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I'm looking at add on to that. Really. Very well said, Matt.
Thanks. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thanks for your time again, Faiza.
No worries. I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. All right. Cheers. All right.
No, you take care of yourself. Bye now.
Yeah, you too. See you later. Bye. Next week on My Northern Roots, I talk to Jan Hicks from Oldham Council's Archive Department.
I work as a kind of a historian, and I've studied history through school. And as an adult, one of the things that I now understand is we are told a version of history. The curriculum is put together for a purpose. And actually, history is more than that.
The Beautiful Oldham Why Not project is a Northern Roots project funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. If you'd like to learn more about Northern Roots, please visit northern-roots.uk. This podcast has been hosted, recorded, edited and produced by Matt Dean of QPod, Oldham's only dedicated podcast production company. For more info, please visit kupod.co.uk.